Chess lovers. In this video, I'm going to show you the best ways to punish the weakest point in your opponent's position. Which point is that? The f7 square. And do you know why? Because it's the only square in the entire opponent's position that's defended only by the king. So pay close attention because this video is going to fascinate you. The first way is one of my favorites when we play the double king's pawn opening. We simply continue with knight to f3 and knight to c6. As you can see, these are the most commonly played moves in the history of chess. So you can use this little trick in most of your games, and we'll continue with the Scotch opening. On this channel, we've seen many times that the best way, without a doubt, for black to continue here is pawn takes pawn, because if not, it allows us to capture, it allows us to advance. So you'll always find that your opponent will capture this pawn. There are a lot of moves available here. Knight takes pawn, bishop to c4, c3, but we're going to go for an excellent move. Knight to g5 gives me goosebumps. Every time I play this move, they fall for the trap. Do you know why? Because they see that this knight is going in alone, and when a piece attacks by itself, everyone knows it can't really do anything. So what do they always do to me? This move right here, h6, telling my knight, hey, don't go into enemy territory or I'll kick you out right away. And instead of retreating, we're going to use, bam, the knight sacrifice on f7 to win the game. How can it be, chess teacher, that this sacrifice, when you don't have any more pieces to attack, actually wins the game? Well, you continue exactly like this. It's super simple. King takes on f7, we lure the king out. Logically, they have to capture that knight. If they don't capture it, we're attacking both the queen and the rook at the same time, so they lose material. They have to take that knight, but they have no idea what's coming. We simply bring in the queen, taking advantage of these gaps. You see that we're giving queen to h5 check. This would allow the opponent to escape with the move g6. So we need to make an in-between move before queen to h5, which is the final plan. What's the first move? This one right here, bishop to c4. Very good move. Now, when the king moves, that's when you play queen to h5. Do you see the difference? Now, g6 is impossible because we would simply capture the pawn and the game would continue the same, whether they play g6 or not. So the game continues with king to e7. We bring in the queen and checkmate is going to be inevitable. Let me show you. Only move, king to d6. Now, we keep threatening the king with the bishop. Bishop to f4, check. The king has to move up, and the game would continue with queen to d5, check. They only have two options, either king to b4 or king to b6, and both would be checkmate with king to b5. The method I'm about to show you now is much more effective, because with the first one, it's likely they won't fall into the trap if they don't play h6, if instead of moving the king back, they move it forward. Even so, we're going to end up with a nice attacking position. But the one I'm about to show you now is the one I use the most in my games. It's spectacular. We'll also continue with the Scotch opening, but when they capture, we'll stick to our gambit style. The style of the Scotch gambit, probably the favorite of many of you, because it's also mine. There are several moves here. We've talked about them on the channel, like knight to f6, bishop to c5. They're the most popular ones, right? For example, bishop to c5 is the one I like to punish the most because it's the one people use the most. What's happening when they play bishop to c5 against us? What we want to do is play c3. What we want is to open up the center. We're playing in gambit style. The most common move is pawn takes pawn. Why are we giving away so many pawns? To open lines and take advantage of our development. And this is where the effective sacrifice on f7 comes in. Bishop takes f7 is going to win us the game. We threaten the king with check. We give up the bishop. Why? Because now the queen comes out. Queen to d5 check, an epic move that I'm sure many of you know. Check, and we take the bishop. If they move back, we capture with check. If they go to e8, first we give this check to weaken this diagonal, and now, yes, we capture the bishop. This in-between move is important, very important. And now, for example, in many videos, we've seen what happens if they play d6, but what happens if they play queen to e7? A dangerous move. They're trying to trade queens and target our e4 pawn. Should we defend it? No, we should capture this pawn with a queen. This is epic. Let me explain why. No matter if they take this pawn with check, right now our opponents have an extra pawn. We're going to play king to d1, and if they make any silly move like knight to f6, we win the queen because we put the rook on the same diagonal as the queen and the king. But if they move it away, good move, for example trying to check our king, we simply block, and this king will never be able to castle again since it has moved, and this rook is going to come to the center, and we're going to attack with a lot of force. And be careful, because we're also threatening the rook on h8, which is practically impossible to defend, since this square is covered by the knight and the queen, and this square is also covered by the queen. Therefore, once again, we've used the bishop sacrifice on f7 to win the game. This is without a doubt my favorite trap for sacrificing on f7. You're gonna love it. It's gonna remind you of a pretty familiar trap, but this is an improved version. Let's start. How? With knight to f3, knight to c6, and indeed, the gambit we're using to pull off these sacrifices is the Scotch gambit, d4. It's a super strong gambit that we talked about many times on the channel. What happens now is that after bishop to c4 with the typical response knight to f6, which is the best move for black, okay? We just saw what happens if they play bishop to c5 against us, right? Let's see what happens with knight to f6. I'm going to show you a trap that we've rarely seen on the channel. Knight to g5. What does this remind you of? Doesn't it remind you of the fried liver attack, the fegatello attack, right? Where we attack f7 with the knight and the bishop. Well, this is an improved version of the fegatello attack. All right, pay close attention, okay? We're attacking the f7 pawn. How do they defend it? There's only one way. What is that way? It's putting the pawn on d5, blocking this diagonal for our bishop. So here's what we do. We capture, and recapturing with the knight is already the decisive mistake. And I'll explain why. Because it's a little different from the fegatello attack, but it's much better. Here, we're attacking the knight. If it moves, we push the pawn and renew the attack. But the real mistake is knight takes pawn, which is what people always play against me when I use this opening. What are black thinking here? Knight takes pawn doesn't work now, which is the typical sacrifice from the fried liver attack, right? Knight takes pawn, a brutal sacrifice. When the king captures, queen to f3, and we take the knight. But what happens then? Here, black isn't forced to capture the knight and can play the wonderful move queen to e7 check. And when we block, they could take our bishop. Even if we block with the queen, they could play king takes knight. That's why now the knight sacrifice on f7 wouldn't work. So, chess teacher, why do you sacrifice the pawn? What's the point of this attack now if we can't continue? Well, yes, here the excellent move is this one right here, castling. A wonderful move. Why is this move so good if what you're doing, chess teacher, is wasting a tempo? Well, we can afford to lose this tempo because there's no way to defend. We move the king away from the center and bring the rook into play. So, since there's no way to defend, we can afford the luxury of castling. What do they want to do? Castle quickly. That's why they always play bishop to e7. They threaten the knight with 2 pieces and allow themselves to castle on the next move. But now, once they've castled, and remember this detail well. Detail. Whenever you're castled, knight takes on f7 is a deadly move. Absolutely deadly. In this case, we threaten the queen and the rook. They can't play queen to e7 because of the bishop, but it doesn't matter. If they had played something else, it wouldn't work either, because the king isn't in the center, so it wouldn't be check, and we would capture the rook. That's why now they have to take. Notice the difference, right? Once they're castled, they have to take. And now the deadly move, obviously, is queen to f3. As you can see, this is an improved version of the fried liver attack, or figatello attack. We attack the king, and we attack the knight. It wouldn't help to cover with the king, because we have the rook to threaten along here, right? It would be way too dangerous. So here, the most common move, logically, is to block the check. We can get the piece back, and in fact, that's what we do. We've recovered the piece, but up to this point, chess teacher, we've sacrificed a piece, and all we've done is get it back. So nothing at all has happened here. Black is in exactly the same position. Oh no. Here, we're much better off because our attack is lethal. The king is in a terribly bad position, while we're in perfect shape. And here, the game would continue as follows. If the king moves away, we would keep attacking with the rook and the bishops, but the most common move is to block with the bishop, so they try to eliminate one of our attacking pieces. Careful, I don't blame them. It seems like a good move, but at this point, there's nothing they can do to stop our attack. For example, what are we going to do? We exchange the bishop to draw the king a little more toward the center, so that we can bring another piece into the attack. Which piece is that? The rook. Rook to 1, check. Where does the king have to go? Well, if he goes this way, it starts to get dangerous because we'll come in with the bishop. Whenever you can bring in an extra piece to threaten the king and gain tempo, you should do it. But what's most commonly done here is that they try to take cover behind their bishop to lure the rook, create an artificial castling, and avoid all the problems. But when the king is in a precarious situation, we always have opportunities and ways to take advantage of it. In this case, how could we do that? Well, for example, by making a double attack and a cross attack. Queen to b3, an excellent move. It attacks the king and also attacks the pawn. As you can see here, at the very least, we win a pawn. The king has to move. For example, king to f8. It really doesn't matter to us where he goes. You can't block the check because there's no piece to do it. That's why it has to move. And then we, for example, could capture this pawn. Would that be a good idea? We already have an extra pawn on top of having a good position. But not only that, for example, we're also gaining tempo by attacking a knight that has to move. The king is in a bad position, and this game is going to end in a win, for example, by playing bishop to f4, also attacking this pawn, moving the knight here or even here, bringing the other rook to the center. The point is that our position is 1,000 times better than our opponent's, and all of that came thanks to our brutal knight sacrifice on f7. I'm sure the sharpest among you have noticed here, after knight to f6, the lethal attack we're launching with knight to g5, a devastating attack. I'm sure many of you have said, yes, d5 is a bad move. I just realized it because a pawn takes pawn in what we just saw. But there's another move here, chess teacher, that you overlooked. If we're threatening this square, then I simply play knight to e5. I defend it perfectly and also attack your bishop on c4. In other words, you can't chase away the knight because I'll capture your bishop and tear you apart. So what should we do here, chess teacher? Is our whole attack over? No. And I love that you all notice this because it means you're aware of all your opponent's options. If you notice it, your opponent will too. And we might end up in these positions. When your bishop is attacked, what should we do? Simple. Let's use logic in chess. What do we want to attack? This f7 square, where we can place the bishop to keep attacking, but putting it on a square where it can't be captured. Simple. b3, right? I'm still threatening f7 with a bishop and a knight. So now if they slip up and, for example, play d6, then I've simply won the game. How? Well, first by driving out the knight, and when it leaves, taking here. You get it, right? So here, they might fall for this trick, not realize it, and think that this knight is well defended. If they do something stupid like this, whatever, we drive out the knight and go in. But of course, here, it might be that they don't waste any time and tell you to get out before it's too late. They kick out this knight and end up better off. That's what everyone thinks, but be careful, because here we're threatening something really strong. We're threatening the following, friends. f4. What a tremendous move. We let them capture the knight if they want. Well, it's not if they want, they have to capture it. Let me explain why. If they don't capture it, that is, if they want to move theirs away, what happens? We come in with the fork since our bishop keeps doing its job. So what should they do here if they can't move the knight away? Logically, they only have one option, capture our knight. They have no other choice. You see that, right? So what should we do? Capture theirs. It's true that now our knight isn't being sacrificed on f2, it's being sacrificed here, and you'll see why. Right now we're attacking this knight, and let's think about where it can go. Not here. Not here because the queen is there. It could go here, but that's a bit sad. Then we threaten it, right? And the knight would be lost, wouldn't it? Most likely. It could come here, but honestly, it doesn't look great. But I can tell you from experience that here, when you capture, they say, well, instead of going to a really bad spot, I'll just capture your pawn on d4. That's obvious. Also, if they come here, we could do exactly the same thing, now that I think about it. Queen takes on d4. Very good move. We're threatening them by d5 could be played. It doesn't seem like the best idea, because after the Amponsen capture, we'd still be threatening the knight and a lot of other things as well. For example, castling, and then we'd have the whole attack ready. That's why here, what they usually do is one of two things, either knight to c5, which seems like a good move because it's well defended, or the trickier players go for knight to g3. I run into that a lot. They threaten your rook and you can't capture this knight. Why not? Because we lose our rook. You see it? That's why they say, well, I'll put the knight here. But this is a mistake. This is a mistake. And if they get too clever, we're going to punish them even more, which I love. How we going to do it? All right, I'll give you 3 seconds to think. Go ahead. That's it. I'm not going to let you think any longer. The idea is to keep the pressure on this point with queen to f2. Logically, we've already won the game here because we're threatening checkmate. So our opponent's priority is to stop the checkmate, a double attack on mate and the knight. Therefore, if they stop the mate, we take the knight. And we've won a free knight for trying to act tough. And if they try, for example, to defend with their own knight, here the knight isn't defended by anyone because the bishop is blocked. So one way or another, they would end up losing the knight. Of course, chess teacher. I mean, if they're really bold and play knight to g3, perfect. I hit them with a trick. But of course, what happens to me is that they're not going to play knight to g3 against me. They're not that good. Or maybe they've seen the follow-up and play the logical knight to c5, which seems way better. And without a doubt, it is. But don't worry, because I've got a recipe to punish that move brutally. We gassle. See how simple that is? And we put pressure on the f7 square, which is the key point of this video, right? With the rook and the bishop, we're basically forcing our opponent to capture our bishop. They get the bishop pair, they capture here, they double our pawns. However, here we have a much more advantageous position, especially in terms of development. We're castled, the rook is aiming here, this pawn is weak, the queen is centralized and can't be easily chased away. And on top of that, all of our opponent's pieces are on the 8th rank. They haven't done anything at all. So be careful here, because we're also threatening the a7 square. And this is where I see the most common mistake in this position. How would you defend this square? So here they play b6, threatening two things. First, blocking this, and second, threatening bishop to c5, winning our queen. Do you see it? Setting up a really effective skewer with the bishop. But here, they've already lost the game, just like you heard, because we can simply play queen to d5, threatening the rook, but also threatening checkmate, thanks to our development advantage. We're threatening checkmate, so of course they have to defend against it. If they move the rook, we win the game, and when they defend against the checkmate, with queen to a7, we simply capture the rook. So what does that mean? It means we've ended up with a completely clean rook advantage, just because they tried to get too clever. And I'll see you tomorrow in the next video, friends. Goodbye.